They said she had no choice. The chapel smelled of damp stone and beeswax, the kind of scent that keeps secrets folded into the pews. Eveline Harrow sat with her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles whitened, as if the pain could anchor her to this moment and stop the world's ledger from tipping further. Outside, the wind had a way of riffling through the eaves like a curious creditor. Inside, parishioners folded their disapproval into hymns. Her dress was the right colour for vows, but wrong for pride. Stitched with careful economy, patched where necessary, every seam a reminder of the accounts at home that would not balance themselves. She had learned early how to wear survival like a second skin. Thank you for sticking around with me, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The offer had arrived discreetly, as such things do. A letter left at the back gate, a steward's polite bow, an explanation couched in terms of charity and stability. Whitcombe House would shelter her family through a winter, the steward had murmured. The Marquess sought a companion of steady temperament, someone who could make a house of small comforts. The exchange had been couched as mercy. The truth was arithmetic, a title in return for a roof and a promise that winter would not swallow her mother and brother. Do you think you would accept that bargain if you were Eveline? Tell me below what you would do. I read every comment. Begin with that question in mind as you step into this scene. Lady Fenwick chose the front pew as if it were a stage and reserved her sharpest glance for Eveline. How brave, she said, loud enough to glide through the chapel like a knife. To marry a man for pity's sake. The congregation performed the soft gasps of judgment as if trained. Eveline's mother's fingers trembled against her handkerchief. Eveline lowered her eyes and counted the sounds of her breath against the vicar's cadence until the words meant nothing and the silence did the heavy work. Lord Rafe Whitcombe arrived late, the door catching on his boots like it had memories it wanted to keep closed. He moved with a gentleman's restraint and a patient cough that made people look at him as one looks at a delicate vase, admiring, fearful of the weight. His coat was well made but sober. Nothing about him announced the sort of wealth that ought to frighten creditors away. Instead, his presence read as careful, like a man who had learned how to step around things that might break. He paused as he entered the row where Eveline sat. For a moment, sound thinned, gossip held its breath. Lady Fenwick, he said, voice low but carrying, we might be kinder than we often are. The remark landed, not as a rebuke, but as a recalibration. The room shifted, small as a swallowed breath. Eveline felt that shift in her bones, not a rescinding of blame, but the crease in the sentence where a new clause could be read. You would spare her the cost of pity? Lady Fenwick returned, tone sugar-laced. And who pays, Marquess? Our pity is not a currency we can spend on every ruin. Sometimes kindness is the only capital we possess, Rafe said. He did not speak with flourish. His words were quiet coins dropped into the chapel's hush. And sometimes the measure of a household is not its plenty, but the steadiness of its keeper. He inclined his head toward Eveline, and in that small motion, the audience saw what he meant. A woman who had learned to make less look like enough. Curious now, murmurs traded like passing notes. A glance slid between parishioners. Eveline felt heat creep up her neck. Not shame this time, but a wary hope. Could a single voice tilt the balance of 1,000 whispers? Does one person's defense ever change what a room has decided? Leave your thought below. I want to know what you think. The vows arrived with the same thin certainty as papers signed at a desk. Words were spoken that could make a home or bind an account. Eveline repeated them because her mouth had learned the language of obligation. The ceremony was small, damp with incense, and the faint smell of boiled broth from the village kitchens. So unromantic that it would have been laughable if Eveline's hands had not been so convincingly steady. Whitcombe House received her like an old portrait framed in dust. Gilding under a film, rugs worn where feet had paced in worry, portraits that watched like stern ancestors who had never forgiven youth. Servants passed like shadows, quiet and efficient. Rafe showed her rooms that had once been lavish. Now they were arranged for ease. Low fires, easy chairs, curtains to keep drafts at bay. He watched her with the patient attention of a man cataloguing the details of a life he might not keep. In the first week, she learned the house's smallest truths. Where to place tea so steam would not wake coughing fits, which pillows eased a spine angry with illness, the map of noises that presaged a bad night. She tended him the way one tends a lamp, delicately, by small gestures that keep a flame from guttering. The servants expected theatrical pity. She gave a practical steadiness, and the household, starved of such normalcy, tightened around it like a saved habit. They supped by lamplight the evening of the wedding, a dinner less celebratory than deliberate. Rafe watched the way she moved to fold toast for a maid who had cracked a tooth, and when Eveline set the plate before him, he made small talk as if through a gauze of propriety. "You have a steady hand for small mercies," he said, not a compliment so much as an observation. "I have watched for that steadiness longer than I should admit." Eveline's fingers hovered over the napkin. "You watched me?" Her voice was smaller than she intended. He did not deny it. Instead, he reached into his coat and produced a folded scrap of paper, edges soft with handling, the sort of creased thing that survives a dozen hands. When he unfolded it, the room seemed to shrink again, sudden, intimate danger. "It is not a list of preferences," he said, "nor of dowries I might expect." His breath came in a small cough. He steadied himself against the table. "I have kept a record, small acts, things I saw you do that made a difference to other people's days." His finger traced the ink, a parcel of flour left at a door, a coin slid to a mother's palm, a stray dog nursed through a cruel frost. Names without flourish, dates without drama, evidence of the quiet courage he had been seeking. "Why me?" Eveline asked, the question unadorned and true. Silence settled like dust. Rafe's face shifted, the practiced pallor softened with something else, regret, perhaps, or the weight of a memory he could no longer keep to himself. "When I was young, I made a series of foolish wagers," he said, voice threaded with confession. "I thought life could be bought back with audacity. I woke once in a lane and found a child under a cart and a woman with mud on her skirts pulling the world back into place. I had the luxury of seeing courage once in my life and mistook it for fortune. I have tried to pay that error forward ever since." The room listened as if breath itself might betray them. Eveline's hands trembled, not from cold, but because the ledger had tilted into a new column. Not pity, but intention. "You arranged this," she said finally, "because you wanted someone who would not flee your decline." "I wanted steadiness," Rafe admitted. "Someone who would make diminishing into a human thing, not a spectacle. I could have sought a rich cousin. Instead, I found your small mercies." His words were not boastful. They were astonishingly humble. Eveline read the lines again. Each small kindness registered like a token being turned over in her palm. A grain of flour, a paid note in secret, a letter asking a creditor to wait. She felt the old grammar of no cracking along its seams. The bargain she had entered to save her family had been set against one other ledger, one of regret and quiet reparations. The choice stretched before her now, not as a trap, but as a narrow doorway with light beyond. Outside, the wind picked up its tally of eavesdroppers' whispers. In the hall below, servants moved with the sort of urgency that means bills will knock at a door tomorrow. The practical world waited. Ledgers, creditors, the kind of arithmetic that does not care for tender confessions. Before the candles burned to stubs and the house settled into the thin murmur of sleep, Eveline felt the weight of decision move from her throat to her feet. She could say no and return to hunger, or say yes and enter an uncertain steadiness. She had been schooled in silence. Now she discovered an unfamiliar voice rising like a tide. Would you keep faith with a person who had secretly helped your family and asked only steadiness in return? Tell me below, does duty turn to love for you when it is built on quiet truth? Rafe folded the creased paper and, with a small, weary smile, offered it to her as something more than a list. A promise that the bargain could be different. He did not ask her to vow to heal him. He asked only that she see him as a man who had erred and tried to make amends. Eveline took the paper, and for the first time in years, she did something that felt reckless. She answered not with silence, but with a single word that would echo through the rooms of Whitcombe House. Yes. Outside, a letter hurried by messenger would arrive at dawn, its seal the colour of worry. Inside, old debts would press like a hand against the throat of any fragile peace. The night, however, held its small triumph. Two people who had been broken in different ways had chosen to keep the pieces together. If you were watching them now, would you cheer their choice, or caution them against hope? Leave a comment. I'll read every reply, and your voice might be the steady thing someone needs tonight. As the candle's flame licked lower, Rafe cleared his throat and began to tell, in a voice that trembled more with relief than sickness, the story of the child under the cart, the seed of why he had chosen her, and the ledger of small mercies that followed. The candles had burned almost to their stubs by the time Whitcombe House settled into the thin, confidential breathing of night. Dawn came with a damp that crept under doors and made the rushes in the halls smell of riverweed. Eveline woke before the servants, the creased paper folded like a talisman in her pocket. She smoothed it once, then twice. As if by habit, she could iron out the old shapes of shame and make room for whatever this new bargain might require. Footsteps began their quiet liturgy. Mr. Ames, the steward, padding ahead to stir embers, a maid with bundled firewood, a man from the stables rattling buckets. The house woke in small, necessary movements. Rafe's cough threaded through the rooms like a percussive weather, an irregular drumbeat that made everyone move around it with soft, practiced caution. Eveline found him at the breakfast table, a thin slice of bread before him, and a cup of tea gone tepid. He kept his eyes down when she entered, as if avoiding the weather that her presence might stir. "You slept well?" she asked, because the smallest courtesies had the power to reassure a fragile thing. "For the most part," he said with a wry lift. "Night is kinder than morning." The laugh that followed was almost a breath stolen from the day. He folded his hands. "Did you sleep poorly?" "A restless sort," she answered, and for a moment their exchange was simply human. Two people negotiating the terms of ordinary life. Mr. Ames appeared at the doorway with the ledger under his arm, his face the colour of steady paper. "Marquess," he said to Rafe, "there's a letter with Mr. Linden this morning. He came in person." The steward's voice did not yet carry alarm, but Eveline felt the word as if it were a stone dropped into calm water. Rafe's gaze sharpened. "Show me." They moved to the study while Eveline poured tea for the servants. The room smelled of parchment and lemon oil. Mr. Ames laid the letter on the desk. The Marquess slit the seal with a practiced thumb. Eveline read over his shoulder as he read, not always the words, but the way his jaw tightened at certain lines. "It is refusal," Mr. Ames said without flourish. "Mr. Linden refuses further delay. He demands settlement within 14 days, or he will attach goods to satisfy the debt." Eveline felt the ground tilt. The creased paper in her pocket seemed suddenly inadequate against a man's signature. "But you have been paying," she began. Rafe's lip trembled. "Small sums," he said. "Interceptions, favours called in. I have tried to keep the most immediate from ruin." He pushed a second volume toward her, its edges soft with use. "Here, ledgers back to my younger years. Read what you will." Eveline opened the book, unearthed a handwriting streaked with haste. Names of tenants, amounts struck through, small notations. Paid, delivered flour, loan covered. Some entries were anonymous, marked only by initials. There were also far crueler things. Large debts piled like cliff faces, years where the arithmetic failed utterly. "You took on a great many private sins," she said, voice low. She touched a line where Rafe had written a name she recognized, an old tenant whose cottage had burned the winter before. "I did wrong," Rafe answered, and the words were a dress he had taken off to show his skin. "When I thought myself invincible, I tried to make others entertain my illusions. I left ruin in my wake. Saving what I could later has been a penance of sorts." He looked up at her, his eyes glassed with something near regret. "I sought steadiness because I feared being loved only for the title. I sought atonement because I could not live with what I had cost others." Mr. Ames shifted, then added a practical blow. "And Mr. Linden is not alone. The Harrow's account still shows deficiency. Other creditors grow impatient. If we cannot show a plan, they will proceed." The steward's words hung like a drawn bow. Lady Fenwick's carriage, with its lacquer and small mercies, arrived mid-morning like a reminder that rumour did not sleep. She alighted with a composure made to cut, her gloves arranged with surgical care. "Marquess, Mrs. Harrow," she said, voice silk over steel. "How fares Whitcombe? One hears that some houses must be stripped to their bones to be honest again. It would be tragic if your ancestors had to watch their land go for the price of a good dinner." Rafe answered with measured civility. Eveline felt the barbs as if they were rain on exposed skin. Lady Fenwick's polite cruelty was a local contagion. She was not there to help, only to test. Her graciousness came with an implied wager. Who would crumble first? That afternoon, Eveline took her first true step beyond tending. Instead of retreating into the household's soft routines, she walked to the back door and asked for the name of the miller, the baker, the man who kept the ledger of small trades. She visited Mrs. Blythe at the next cottage, Mrs. Blythe, who had bartered jams for ribbons with her mother, and came away with a list of modest favours the Harrows had once exchanged, a few promises that could be enticed into loans. She did what she had done in smaller stakes. She called on old favours and repaid them with candour instead of apology. Back at Whitcombe, she sat down with Mr. Ames and the Ledgers to make a plan. "We will offer staggered payment," she said, more to see the words in the air than to command. "We will show evidence of every small sum already paid. We will ask for time and propose labour contracts with nearby tenants to offset interest." Her voice surprised her. It was steady, pragmatic, the sound of someone who had spent years negotiating survival without a seat at any table. Mr. Ames inclined his head. "If you will write the letter, madam, I will see it delivered. The Marquess can sign." They inked the pages together like a compact. Eveline's hand, the same that had once folded away pleas, pressed the pen to paper with a resolve that felt less like resignation than a beginning. By dusk, things had shifted, if only fractionally. They had a plan to present, names to vouch for, and a letter that laid out truth rather than pleading. There was work to be done, and work is a kind of hope. Then, before supper, Rafe's coughing returned in a storm. It took him without warning, a harsh, rattling descent that made his whole body fold. Eveline was at his side in an instant, sleeves rolled, the steward barking quick orders. She felt the familiar, terrible drag of fear. This was not ledger work. This was life itself fraying at the edges. His hand came up through the cough and found hers across the blanket. It closed with the strength of a man who had meant to be small but would not be alone. "Stay," he whispered between fits. "Do not leave me because of what I will owe the world." "No," she said, because she had words now that were not bartered. "I will not." Do you think a woman can alter a house's fate with nothing but courage and a few honest names? Share your opinion below. Your answer might inspire someone facing a similar ledger. They worked the night together. Eveline sent for an apothecary. She rubbed his back. She read from the old ledgers when insomnia kept him awake. The house felt less like a portrait and more like a puzzle in hand, each small piece requiring careful placement. The danger had not passed, but neither had they. In the hush between coughs and the rustle of paper, a new truth settled. Survival would demand action, not pity, and Eveline, having found her voice, would not shrink from it. Before long, the moon set and the house finally fell silent, each person at their post. Eveline sat with Rafe's hand in hers and stared into the small pool of light that remained, thinking of plans and payments and the odd courage of tiny mercies. Do you believe steadiness can build something like love? Tell us below. Your words could steady someone else tonight. Eveline had not slept well. The house still hummed of last night's quiet industry. Ledgers closed on kitchen tables, a kettle gone cold, the faint tang of lemon oil from the study. She held Rafe's hand until dawn loosened their grip, and then rose because there was work to do. Bills do not wait for courage to arrive. No sooner had she moved through the corridor than there was a sharp rap at the front door, 3 deliberate knocks that do not belong to friends. Mr. Ames opened it with the composure of someone who keeps a ledger of interruptions. A man in a dark coat and a ribboned letter in his hand filled the doorway like a verdict. "Marquess Whitcombe?" he asked, voice flat as a seal. "I am Mr. Linden. I deliver this writ by order of my client. You are served." Rafe had been reclining in a high chair by the fire. He looked older in the morning light. The paper slid across the table between them, was official and unyielding. Eveline read the first line and felt the room tilt. Demand for immediate settlement, threat of attachment within days. The practical world had sharpened its teeth. "You will see, Mr. Linden, that arrangements are being made," Rafe said, each word chosen like a step on thin ice. "I am instructed only to ensure due process, my lord," Linden replied. "If settlement cannot be arranged by the 14th day, I am at liberty to take goods." Eveline felt the air behind her ribs tighten. "Mr. Linden," she said before she could smooth the tremor from her voice, "if you could see the state of things, our tenants' accounts, the ledgers kept here, you would find we are not acting in bad faith." Her words surprised her by how steady they sounded. "We have documentation of staggered payments and of deliveries of flour and coal. We can show good faith." Linden's eyes flicked to Mr. Ames, then to Rafe. "Paper is persuasive, madam, but so is a signature. You will need a plan, and soon." The man departed with a stately, bureaucratic finality, and his steps left an echo of the writ's deadline in the house. That echo brought with it the clang of ambition. A carriage in the lane, and a visiting solicitor who spoke plainly of buyers and land sales, as if Whitcombe's acres were tokens to be cashed without regard to memory. Lady Fenwick, unsurprisingly, was not content to remain a rumour. She arrived with a guest, Mr. Holloway, a practical buyer with money enough to make decisions swift. He did not hide his intent. "There are pieces of Whitcombe that can be parcelled off," he said over tea, fingers drumming contracts. A sale now would cover Mr. Linden's claim and leave the house with a smaller, sustainable estate. "It is sensible." Rafe's face thinned. "Sell ancestral land for the sake of appearance?" he asked. The question carried pride and a prickly, dangerous humility. Eveline watched the argument like a fulcrum. Her heart beat a practical rhythm. If they carved the land, they would lose not just soil, but memory and livelihoods. "What if we do not sell?" she asked, suddenly aware of the steady voice she had been cultivating. "What if we show a plan that will satisfy creditors? I can vouch for names who will work, who will lease, who will accept staggered payment. Mrs. Blythe will take a cottage to supervise jam production for market. The miller would accept grain in part payment if we contract his services. I know these people. They trust their word when it is honest." Mr. Holloway inclined his head with a polite skepticism. "You propose barter and local labour to cover debts? That may be noble, madam, but it is slow. Mr. Linden's writ is immediate." Eveline's hands flattened to the table. "Then let us ask for time and give security elsewhere. We will offer a schedule, implement contracts, have tenants sign affidavits of continued service to the estate. I can write the letter and call on the people who owe us small favours still." She met Rafe's eyes. "We can lead with honesty instead of surrender." Rafe's chest heaved. Pride warred with pragmatism. He had spent a life perched above the work of others, and it humbled him to see his title insufficient against ledger sums. "I have tried to mend what I broke," he said. "I have placed coin in hidden hands, paid fines I should have faced openly. I feared being pitied, Eveline, and feared being loved only for grand gestures. I thought I could buy forgiveness. I was wrong." "You bought quiet, not amends," Mr. Ames observed, voice neither condemning nor forgiving, but accurate. "I paid what I could," Rafe continued, face pale as an old letter. "But not enough. The damage is still present. I sought steadiness by saving those I could. Steadiness requires someone who will see the truth, not flee from it." Eveline felt the softening beneath the armour of his confession. It did not absolve him of past wrongs, but it explained the ledger of small mercies. The house's moral arithmetic shifted. It was not only debts of money, but debts of conscience to be resolved. Before they could finalise words into a letter, Rafe's coughing began like a storm gathering at sea. First a crackle, then a public collapse of breath. He clutched at the table, colour washing from his face. "Light the lamp," he ordered, voice thin. Eveline was already up, sleeves rolled, panic trained into motion by necessity. She thrust the draft letter into Mr. Ames' hands. "Send for the apothecary, fetch the tinctures. Open the window only a little, no draughts. Wet a cloth for his face." She barked the orders with a practical clarity that surprised everyone, perhaps most of all her. Rafe doubled over, his shoulders heaved. The room smelled of iron and the tang of fear. Mr. Ames and two servants worked as if rehearsed, while Eveline placed cool compresses at his temples and pressed a spoonful of a bitter tonic to his lips. He took it with a broken gratitude and coughed until the sound became a low, dangerous rasp. Between fits, Rafe's hand found Eveline's. He gripped it like a man holding onto a dock. "There are sums I have kept back, small reserves I hid," he rasped. "They were to be my last attempts at making amends. I did not plan to ask you to risk yourself for them." Eveline's jaw set. "We are past planning not to risk. What is there?" He hesitated. The creased paper of his quiet mercies blossomed in Eveline's mind into a potential lifesaver. A small fund, placed in trust. It could cover immediate claims if we sign it over. "You will not let me sign without knowing," she said. "Show me." He produced an envelope from his breast pocket with hands that shook. Inside, folded and sparse, was a note and a small purse, the secret sum he had kept in the hope of a future private amends. The sight of it tightened Eveline's heart and widened her resolve. Outside, the ridge of the day slid away into dusk. The Ritz deadline loomed like a tide. Eveline took the purse and the note into her hands. This was a moment that asked whether she would trade the Harrows' last small security for Whitcombe's immediate breath. Would you sign away your family's last reserve to save another household's legacy? Tell me below, how far would you go for duty? Your answer matters. She laid the purse on the ledger and, with Mr. Ames watching and Rafe's hand in hers, wrote her name where the signature would bind the small trust to Lyndon's appearance. The ink soaked the paper dark and irrevocable. As she lifted the pen, the house seemed to hold its breath with her. She had not the certainty of victory, only the certainty of action. Her word, her risk, had been pledged. The candle guttered. The room waited for Lyndon's response, for Rafe's recovery, for the ledger to tally in a way mercy could meet. When at last she pressed the completed page into Mr. Ames's hands, the steward's face was a map of caution and hope. Eveline felt both fear and a curious, steady elation. She had become the kind of person who would stake everything rather than witness collapse. A messenger rode for Mr. Lyndon. The crack of hooves in the lane sounded like an approaching verdict. Eveline tucked the creased paper close to her heart and sat by Rafe, both of them small against the enormous, uncompromising sky. Do you think she did right to put everything on the line? Leave a comment. Your voice could be the steadiness somebody needs tonight. The messenger's hooves had not yet faded from the lane when the house received its next blow. Mr. Ames returned from the front door with a look that folded years into a single crease. He laid a thin, official-looking envelope on the table and cleared his throat as if preparing to deliver more than ink. "It is from Mr. Lyndon," he said. "He will accept the small trust as a temporary hold only if additional security is provided. He requests immediate confirmation of other assets. And there is," he hesitated, the pause a small confession, "there is also a summons from a different creditor, one of the old claims, Mr. Alderney. He has resurfaced." Rafe's face tightened in a way that made Eveline feel each line of his past as a fresh cut. "Alderney," he echoed, the name a tinderbox of old debts and misdeeds. "He was someone I thought long paid." "Apparently not," Mr. Ames said. His clerk delivered an account of charges and a note. "He remembers being ruined by your actions, Marquess. He intends to test our willingness to resolve." The morning folded in on itself. News travels in a country house the way frost finds the hollows. Mrs. Blythe, who had come to help with jam contracts, delivered a neighbour's gossip as if it were a formal petition. Tom Harrow, Eveline's brother, was at the gate, eyes rimmed with shame and a plea in his voice. "Eveline," he said, breathless, "they say Alderney remembers. He demands repayment. I can fetch what's left of our stores." "Not now," Eveline said, because months of scarcity had taught her the economy of decisions. She met her brother's gaze and saw in it the old hunger and the new dependence. "Stay in the cottage. We have plans. We will not be rushed into losing what little remains." Later, when servants had gone back to their chores and the afternoon sun slanted like a suspicion through the study window, Mr. Ames asked to speak with Eveline in private. His face wore the same ink-stained solemnity as the ledgers he kept. "There are things you should know," he began after a patient clearing of his throat. Not all of the Marquess's reparations were straightforward. When I was young and new to his house, there were times I thought him reckless, then penitent. He paid debts, yes, but some payments came at great cost to others. Eveline's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Mr. Ames folded his hands. There was a family, the Larks, tenant folk. A year of bad weather. The Marquess chose to cover their dues when they fell behind, but in doing so, he drew funds from a trust that might have paid another claim. He curtailed repairs for another tenant to feed that family. I admired the compassion, but I have also seen that one secret favour can set another household to ruin. So his mercy sometimes hurt others, Eveline said slowly, the moral arithmetic rearranging in her mind. He tried to fix one wrong, and in doing so caused others. He did more than that, Mr. Ames added. There are ledgers that show investments squandered in youth, gambling houses, speculative crops, that must be answered to. Some men he ruined were those whose kindness you once benefited from. He tapped the table. He has spent much of his later life in repair. His penance has been costly. The tenants' names pricked at Eveline's memory. The Lark's eldest with a cough like hers, the Millers who had stood at her mother's door in a night of frost. She felt the contradictory pull of compassion and betrayal. I thought he saved us from cold, she murmured. But at what price to others? Your question is the right one, Mr. Ames said. Your loyalty must be chosen with sight. Eveline left the steward's study with a new tightness in her chest. Outside, the lane was filled with the clatter of a carriage, a formal visit this time from a neighbour who had once been a friend to the Whitcombes, but who now offered a polished, profit-hardened face. Word spread that a sale offer had arrived for a slice of the estate. The man presented it as a kindness, a practical solution that would spare the household ruin if accepted quickly. That evening, after the day's tumults, Eveline did something that shocked the most careful part of herself. She composed a letter meant not to beg for mercy, but to assert truth. She would not be the woman who accepted rumour's currency. She would call out the acts she could prove, the names who would vouch for the work done and the debts paid. And she would ask publicly for time and acknowledgement of the Marquess's reparations where they existed. If truth could be weaponized by the gossips, she would weaponize truth back. She read the letter aloud to Mr. Ames and then to Rafe, whose colour had gone in the late afternoon with the cough's renewed severity. You would go to the parish and post this? Rafe asked, surprise and a wounded pride mingling. I would, Eveline said. We will not wait for the town to decide our fate in the dark. We will bring our accounts into the light. People remember acts for reasons simpler than scandal. They remember when someone gave them bread. I will ask those people to speak. Rafe's responses were small, a nod, a hand over his mouth as if breathing careful confessions. If you do this, you must be prepared for the worst, he warned. Some will call you brazen. Others will pry and say I used you as a shield. I would hate to be the instrument of anyone's ruin again. You were never my instrument, she shot back, fiercer than she had been in months. You were the one who offered a life that saved mine. You made amends as you knew how. That does not free you of consequence, but it demands honesty. Mr. Ames delivered the letter at dusk, his steps precise. Eveline waited with a bruise of hope and fear. She had chosen transparency and risked the scorn of the gentry. She had, in public, placed the Marquess's small mercies alongside the ledger of debts and asked that the community weigh both. It was an audacious thing to ask the town to remember her neighbours as more than gossip fodder. Before the ink dried at the posting, Rafe rose suddenly, seized by a fit of coughing so violent it sent him to his knees. Eveline was at his side in an instant, pulling him up, supporting him, the letter slipping from her fingers to the floor. Mr. Ames and a servant rushed in, hands practiced and precise, while Eveline bared her hands to work without hesitation. Between ragged breaths, Rafe grasped her wrist. There is one more thing I can give, he rasped. His voice was thin but steady. The disputed claim on the northern pasture. There is paperwork I can sign to relinquish my claim. It will mean some immediate loss to my name, but perhaps it will keep Whitcombe's core intact. Eveline's mind moved in ledgered sums. Relinquishing land was not a small act. It would cut into the estate's future. Yet the gesture was not just monetary. It was moral. It was another piece of atonement, another willingness to give. She met his eyes, and in them she saw not a man begging forgiveness, but a man continuing to pay for his errors. "Do it," she said. "If it will save the people who work for us and keep this house whole, sign it." His hand shook as he reached for the pen, but he signed with a determination that both humbled and steadied her. The small piece of paper, bearing the Marquess's hand, felt like a confession and a gift rolled into one. Outside, the town clock chimed the hour that marked decisions. The letter she had posted might inflame or might bring allies. The relinquishment might buy them days or hollow them out. The house gathered itself like a bandage around the pain. Do you think honesty can repair what secrecy once broke? Leave a comment. Your voice may steady someone deciding between mercy and recompense. A note arrived before the night ended. Mr. Linden requested a final meeting at dawn. The deadline tightened like a noose, and the path forward would demand more than ledgers. It would demand community testimony, legal maneuvering, and perhaps a sacrifice neither Eveline nor Rafe could yet imagine. Time had become the creditor that could not be bargained with. She sat with him through the long, ragged hours, keeping vigil as coughs came and then subsided. In the hush between them, the shape of something like love, not the lofty thing of ballads, but the quiet partner work of two people bearing consequences together, grew firmer. A small wooden chair beside the bed of a man who would step down from pride to keep what mattered. When the first pale light slipped through the curtains, both were awake, exhausted and awake, knuckles white on each other's hands. The final meeting awaited. The house awaited a verdict. And beyond the threshold, the town's memory, for good or ill, would be called upon to speak. Dawn had not yet burned off the mist when the party assembled in the great parlour for the meeting that might finish them, or spare them. The Marquess sat in a high-backed chair, thinner now, more paper than man, a shawl across his shoulders. Eveline stood beside him, lettered pages in her hand, and a steadiness in her voice that had been earned the hard way. Mr. Linden arrived with the exact cold civility of a man who deals in deadlines. Mr. Holloway, the buyer, carried the polite smile of someone who measures everything in acres and coin. Mr. Gresham, the quiet merchant who had once accepted Eveline's barter of jam for credit, arrived last, fingers stained with grain and goodwill. "Marquess," Linden began, unfolding the writ as if it were a contract that had already decided the world. "We are here to settle the claims. Mr. Alderney insists." "Before we speak of sale," Eveline interrupted, and the room paused at the sound of her voice. "We have a plan and witness statements. We have staggered repayments, tenant contracts, and—" She lifted the signed relinquishment of the northern pasture that Rafe had already made. "We have the Marquess's relinquishment of disputed claims as a token of good faith." Holloway's lip tightened. "The relinquishment reduces land value. It is a concession, certainly. But how does that answer immediate demands?" Eveline placed copies of tenant affidavits on the table, Mrs. Blythe's neat scrawl promising supervised production, the miller's signature confirming grain for labour exchanges, a line of names from workers who would vouch for the estate's value if it remained intact. Mr. Ames set the ledgers beside them, inked lines showing the small sums Rafe had redirected, receipts, even notes of credit quietly extended to the Harrows. Linden scanned the documents, his expression unreadable. "Paper will persuade some, but Mr. Alderney has cause. He will want certainty." Rafe's voice came, thin but deliberate. "Then let my name be the certainty." He leaned forward with an effort that made Eveline start, and the room felt the weight of his confession as if it were a bell. "I accept the liabilities I have created. I will sign a schedule of repayment, secured by what remains of the estate and by the relinquishment. But I will not sell the heart of Whitcombe, our fields that feed the village. I will not allow my past folly to starve others." The admission landed with unexpected force. Holloway looked at Rafe anew, not as an abstraction of land, but a man who could be trusted to bind his word to ink. Linden, who navigated legal thought like a river, rubbed his chin. "If the Marquess is prepared to sign a binding schedule, and if we can secure surety, perhaps from Mr. Gresham's credit, then the writ need not be enforced immediately." He glanced at the merchant. Mr. Gresham, who had listened in silence, inclined his head. Mrs. Harrow wrote to me in a clear hand. She did not beg, she offered truth. I value that. I will underwrite a bridge loan to cover immediate claims if the repayment schedule is credible and if the community binds itself to support the enterprise. I am not a philanthropist in sentiment, Mr. Linden, but I am a man who sees mutual interest. The room balked, then leaned. Holloway's keen eye calculated margins. Linden calculated risk. Eveline felt the scale shift, but the meeting had not yet surrendered its teeth. Then we will draft the schedule, Linden said. We will place the relinquishment and the schedule before a solicitor, and if signatures are pledged, I will advise my client to hold off attachment pending the first installment. A low hum of relief ran through the servants assembled behind the doors. Eveline's fingers loosened on the papers. Mr. Ames allowed himself a breath that might have resembled a smile. Rafe's hand found Eveline's with a strength that surprised them both. "You did this," he said, throat rough. "You steered truth as argument." "You opened doors," she answered. "You opened your ledger to shame and to repair. We did it together." Holloway cleared his throat. "I will buy a small strip to cover my proposed losses," he conceded. "But only the peripheral field. Whitcombe's core will remain to maintain tenant livelihoods." It was not everything. Land would move under new hands. Debts would be scheduled. The relinquished pasture would become a legal blotch on Whitcombe's map. But the immediate crisis had been averted. No seizure that morning. No parish sale to scatter renters like chaff. The victory was browned and practical. It smelled of paper and the faint sweat of negotiation, not of triumphal music. Eveline felt a fatigue that was not defeat. It was work done and consequence accepted. Before the meeting ended, Linden spoke quietly to the Marquess. "You have been frank. That helps a man more than you might know. If you continue in this course, if you sign and adhere, your creditors may see reason. But be warned, faith is a slow currency." Rafe looked at Eveline with a softness that had not been there in the early days of their arrangement. "You stayed," he said, "not from pity, but from purpose." Eveline's throat tightened. "I stayed because I had a choice," she replied, and the words tasted of iron and salt. "I would not trade the Harrows' last coin for shame. I will stand and rebuild." They left the parlour under a sky that had lightened to a cautious blue. Work followed. Contracts to sign, a schedule to file with Mr. Linden, a small ceremony in the solicitor's office that felt more like settlement than celebration. The household had survived its immediate threat, but the cost was visible in relinquishments and in the list of land to be sold. The future would be careful, stitched with thrift and steady labour rather than splendour. That evening, Rafe's cough returned, furious enough to buck him into a chair. Eveline sat beside him, a cup warm against his lips, and he reached for her with a hand that no longer seemed to fear being a burden. "I promised steadiness," he murmured, "and I promised to keep what I had broken from becoming others' ruin." "You kept something else," she said, smoothing his sleeve. "You kept truth. I chose to stay because truth was given me." He smiled then, small and relieved. "And I chose you because you were the kind of person who could make my decline bearable." The words between them were not a trumpet's fanfare, but a domestic pact, imperfect, necessary, full of mutual repair. Eveline laid her hand over his and did not withdraw it when the coughing fit left him weak. She would not be the woman who shrank from care. Weeks passed in a rhythm of work and tending. Mr. Gresham's loan covered the immediate claims. Holloway purchased the peripheral field at a price that left both parties tolerably satisfied. Tenant contracts stabilized harvests. The relinquished pasture would never be theirs again, but children still ran in the meadows where nothing had yet been sold. The house's accounts balanced not in comfort, but in honest craft. One bright morning, long after the first chill had been replaced by a tentative warmth, Eveline stood in the conservatory where the remaining orange trees pushed small buds toward light. She knelt with a needle and a scrap of patched rug across her knees, mending the worn edge with careful stitches. Rafe watched from a nearby chair, breathing steadier, a thin smile on his lips. "They said you had no choice," he said softly. Eveline's hand did not stop. "They said a great many things," she answered, "but what we did was choose." He reached for her hand and did not let go. Outside, the village stirred. not riveted by scandal, but by the slow work of living. The ledgers still lay on the table, inked and honest. The cottage fires burned. The orange tree in front of her, one small stubborn thing, promised a fruit next season perhaps, or perhaps not. That did not matter. Eveline rose, pressed a kiss to the Marquess's brow, as if sealing a small private victory, and looked out over the fields she had decided to protect. There was loss, there would be more to pay and more mornings of careful accounting, but there was also a steady, growing thing between them that had not been planned. She had been forced into marriage once, she would not be forced again. She had chosen, at last, to keep the pieces. Would you have made the same choice Elise made? Would you sacrifice a little to save a community and accept an imperfect but honest future? Share your thoughts below. Someone reading may need the courage your answer gives tonight. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.